Hello.
Good morning.
How are we doing?
Great.
Great. How are you doing?
Doing okay. Putting one foot in front of the other. Which I guess is the best we can hope for, right?
Absolutely.
But I guess we should dive right in, right?
Absolutely.
Amazing. Well, first things first, I'm so excited to be in conversation with you all this morning with AMP here to talk all things Gen Z and to talk all things audio and how much noise Gen Z is going to make in this next year. And as we know, Gen Z is an incredibly powerful cohort, right? Of billions of people from around the world who are consuming content and who are shaping culture, right, in novel ways every single day. And I'm a proud member of Gen Z. And I am really excited that we have the chance to talk to you, both of you, who spend a lot of time thinking about sound, thinking about Gen Z, and thinking about the noise that we're going to make to really emphasize, right, that I think more and more brands need to be thinking holistically about how to capture Gen Z's attention, because we know that we're digitally multitasking all day, every day, and oversaturated with choice, and that it's critical that folks really understand how to capture our attention if they want to stay relevant, right? And that means catching us in ways that maybe are not as conventional, and thinking more holistically through brand and identity, which I think is what we're going to talk a little bit about today. But first things first, I'm Ziad Ahmed. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the CEO and founder of Juve Consulting. I am a Gen Zer. I'm 25 years old, which makes me rather old Gen Zer. And I am trying my best. But over to y'all to maybe introduce yourselves a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, I'm MaryLeigh Bliss. I am the Chief Content Officer at YPulse. YPulse is the leading authority on Gen Z and millennials. We are constantly serving 13 to 39-year-olds in both North America and Western Europe across a huge range of behaviors and trends, really to find out what they're fueling, what brands need to understand about young consumers to reach them authentically. And yeah, I'm really happy to be here today.
Awesome. Yeah, hello. I'm Rex Hirshhorn. I am a research and insights consultant here at AMP, doing sonic analysis, running sonic branding research and cognitive studies. Just really, really excited to be here. I mean, I don't know if I need to go too much into what we do here at AMP, because hopefully most people have read our Gen Z Amplify magazine, and we're all here on the LinkedIn Live. So I'm really excited to get going. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, to set the stage, I guess let's start with just what is significant or unique about the relationship between sound and Gen Z today?
Yeah, I think Gen Z has a very different relationship with audio and sound than previous generations. Just a few examples. Well, they're growing up in the podcast era, which is, something that I think a lot of brands overlook, even though if you listen to podcasts, you know exactly what brands are running ads. That Greens company, HelloFresh is on there all the time. Anyway, the majority of Gen Z is growing up listening to podcasts, but that's just one piece of audio entertainment for them. When you look at their social media use, TikTok is now the #1 platform that Gen Z is on, with the majority, 73% of 18 to 24-year-olds on the app. That is much higher than millennials. And it's now their #1 social platform. And on TikTok, audio is a form of creativity. It is a separate piece from video that all users can take and layer onto. So audio itself can go viral in a way that it really couldn't for previous generations. So it is kind of a centerpiece of their pop culture.
Absolutely.
100%.
Yeah. And I think this is actually a nice segue. I think that really there's two answers to this question from my perspective, at least. I'm also Gen Z. To add that, I realized I didn't say that in the preliminary introductions, but the quantity of music and sound at the disposal of Gen Z is like we've never seen before. I did a little bit of research prior to this, of course, and they're saying that roughly 100,000 songs are released each day, and as someone who wants to put that into concrete terms, if you listen to 100,000 songs, roughly 3 minutes and 15 seconds on average, you're going to be listening to 225 days straight of music. And that's just talking about music. As MaryLeigh, as you pointed out, like we're also discussing podcasts, and which there's 700,000 roughly active currently. And that's just, active. That's not even assuming the ones that aren't being made anymore. Because I'm on the slightly older side of Gen Z too, I remember the days of the Walkman very briefly. I remember the Beatles albums that my parents would give me to walk around with. But then also moving into iTunes and, playing those 30-second clips just to keep listening to the song or buying it for $1.29 or whatever it was by the end. But then, when we moved into streaming into 2008 with Spotify, just the vast amount of music that is at the disposal, and audio in general, being audiobooks and podcasts as well, that is at the disposal of Gen Z is remarkable. And it actually, it makes it really exciting because it expands the auditory palette of Gen Z to a point that allows for a lot of diverse music to be created, a lot of different thoughts to be shared, all through this great medium. And then on the other end, beyond the ability to explore, I think we also have the ways that Gen Z is using music. There's a great quote, and this was actually from the iTunes era a little bit. I think it was 2007. Dr. Ruth Herbert described music as a utilitarian resource. And I think that is never been more true than it is today. We're seeing 68% of millennials and Gen Z from Spotify's report list music as a mental health resource. That's a significant amount. So the idea that music is becoming this tool and medicine for a group that also grew up during an isolating time, during a pandemic, and those were formative years, to have this ability to turn to something like music at such a great quantity is, I think, the real true significance. It's not just unique, but important as well.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned Spotify's Culture Next report. A stat in the report stated that 73% of Gen Zers agree that culture today is more diverse rather than homogenized than it was 5 years ago, thanks to digital streaming. How can brands be mindful of catering to Gen Z's audio consumption while staying true to their brand ethos? Rex, do you want to start?
I think, MaryLeigh, I think you might be muted.
Oh.
Rex, you can go ahead and start.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to. Yeah, this is great. And I think it kind of goes back to what I was discussing a little bit, is just this auditory palette, which I love that phrase. It's really growing. It's so Gen Z has exposed to a wider range of genre styles, music preferences than ever possible, because for the same price that you would have bought that Beatles compilation album back in the early 2000s on a CD or on iTunes is what you're getting a whole 100,000 songs a day for, which is incredible. And so this is leading to two things. Is first, brands need to be approaching this by making sure that they have their brand voice down. That is the number one thing. Brands need to show authenticity, which I know we'll discuss more about. That is key. And having a brand voice that shares musical characteristics is huge. There's been multiple studies over the last decade to 2 decades that have shown that when brands and music match in terms of their emotional characteristics, in terms of their brand voice, they actually, it leads to more positive product evaluations. And if it does not, it actually can be counterfactual and lead to a decline in consumer brand relationship. So those things are really key. So to have something that speaks to your brand voice is everything. But then on top of that, we need something flexible. That brand voice needs to be able to speak to different audiences, speak to different demographics, speak to different preferences even. And that's really key. I think the best example, as we were discussing COVID, is I'm just gonna very basic example here is pretend your brand can only really sound happy, and a COVID pandemic hits our world and you still need to be branding for your brand. You can't continue to to show the message of hopefulness and trying to connect and showing empathy to the isolation that we're all feeling while having a happy soundtrack in the background. That's not going to work. So you abandon your brand voice. That's happened a lot. There's a lot of compilations of showing of all the videos using the same piano style arpeggiated music during that time period. What that really leads to is my overall thesis here, which is that brands need a flexible enough voice to adjust to show that they can be empathetic with their consumer during a time that's really difficult, while not abandoning what really makes them a unique brand. And so that's really how to adjust to the kind of the more diverse digital streaming mindset.
I think too, there's just so much opportunity. We've mentioned just some of the ways that audio impacts Gen Z, and we haven't even touched on all of them, beyond podcasts and audiobooks, which, Gen Z does love books, despite reputations to otherwise. And music, which obviously a huge driving force for all young consumers of every generation, but Gen Z is in that phase of life where music is a huge passion and touch point for them more than other generations. They're consuming more of it. And then beyond that, video games. The majority of Gen Z tell us in our research that they like when artists are featured in artists that they love, music artists that they love are featured in video game soundtracks. It's actually one of the ways that they are consuming music the most because they're spending so much time in video games. There's so many, and then audio on TikTok and now other platforms that can go viral in and of itself. There's so many ways that brands can be engaging with Gen Z with their audio consumption. So staying true to your brand ethos, I think, is finding which way makes sense for your brand. Are you a brand that should be jumping onto a meme, a viral moment that's audio driven? Are you a brand that should be working with a music artist, which we've seen so many brands successfully do, from McDonald's artists meals to, Flaming Hot Cheetos, it's all there. Or are you a brand that should be, creating unique video game soundtracks or audiobooks? There's just so many ways. So I think important to know your brand persona, as you mentioned, Rex, and then figure out which is the right audio format that you can be reaching Gen Z with.
Absolutely.
Amazing. I think you guys answered half the questions just in those answers. We talked about authenticity, we talked about culture, we talked about music. But I think as we think about, all the different ways in, right, to sonic branding, right, to authenticity, and to creating your brand, right, what should brands be considering, right? Is it all TikTok? What are the platforms? What are the places? What are the strategies that you guys best recommend? Because it is kind of daunting, especially when you haven't thought of it before, right? We often think of brand identity in visual terms. And I think increasingly, right, Gen Z thinks about it in emotional terms, right? The way that we feel about a brand is really how we decide they're purchasing, right? And I think what makes us feel is, of course, all the many inputs, right, that shape a brand. But a lot of those are coming from social media, right? And a lot of those are coming from culture, right? But a lot of brands that certainly keep me in business, right, need to understand how to figure out how to connect with those places and spaces. And so I'd love to hear from you guys what strategies you guys think that people should approach as they consider this sort of new frontier of building that holistic feeling that you have with your consumer.
Sure. We just released our social media playbook for 2024. And one of the big things that we emphasize straight away is, yes, TikTok is vital for reaching this generation. Yes, you absolutely need to have a strategy there, but it is not the only platform that they're on. I think when one new social media, although, calling TikTok new at this point is a little bit false, but when a newer social platform gets a lot of momentum and a lot of growth, brands jump on and they tend to forget that they're still using multiple platforms. Our research shows that Gen Z is on an average of 6 platforms. They're jumping back and forth between those in the over 4 hours a day that they're spending on social. That's their own self-estimate, which means it's likely even more than that. So there are many platforms that you can be looking at. And YouTube is one that I think brands should absolutely not be ignoring. It's actually near tied with TikTok in terms of the top social platform that they're using. We do consider it a social platform because of the amount of engagement and community that's built in the comments there. So I think, having an understanding that it's multiple platforms, and then again, thinking about your brand persona and figuring out, no, you can't be on all of them, but you should be on multiple that make sense for your brand. And then I'll again hammer the drum that gaming platforms are also social for Gen Z. So those need to be part of the mix and considered as well. Figuring out where your audience is spending their time and investing in that research. What's your target demographic and what are the platforms that they are on the most? Then which ones make sense for you? I think those are all a part of the mix in terms of figuring out exactly what brands need to be sorting through and then committing to.
Amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, going off that, I think that statistic, especially the 4 hour, 4 hours a day. And you're right. I can say we are probably underestimating that.
Yeah, it's likely higher.
It's likely higher, 100%. But I think that 4 hours a day speaks volumes to how much time is being spent. And if you're not branding holistically, which includes Sonic on in that 4 hour period, or again, probably more, that's a long period of time that you're missing out on an opportunity. And I think that's where we really can come back to what our brands need to be doing. They need to be investing in their voice. And especially now that we've made that transition from kind of the sound off platforms like Instagram, which started as still pictures, to the sound on TikTok when it got big in 2018, and how Instagram followed suit, Facebook followed suit, YouTube, which was a video platform, but followed suit in terms of the short form video content. All of that followed suit. Audio is now on when you're watching this content, which means that if they're spending 4 hours a day on it, audio is being played. And I think that's really key. And, I think one of the unique portions of this as well. And so by investing in your brand voice, you will hopefully be in front of Gen Z more, but a lot of that comes back to the idea that audio is a very special medium because you can travel with it and you can do other things while engaging with it. And as a result, you can also be in front, by having a brand voice, you can also be in front of these of your consumers while they're doing other things. So, a Pandora study recently showed that 69% of its audience listens to more audio content today because they can take it anywhere. You've also seen recent results of showing higher levels of arousal in the brain, which increases cognitive functioning. So people are starting to listen to music and audio at work. So all of this time spent listening to audio, and if you're not branding during that time, there's so much missed opportunity there.
Yeah, I should note that our music research actually says that the majority of Gen Z say they listen to music all day long. So it really is something that's constantly there for them. And, we're talking about the different forms of audio. Music is one that, as I said, a huge passion point, and just constantly part of their day. So absolutely true.
Yeah, I can't do silence. Either I'm watching TV or I'm talking to someone or I'm listening to music for sure. And if someone listens to like less than 50,000 minutes a year on Spotify, like I don't really know how they're surviving. But I think on that point, insofar as like the language, right, that Gen Z is speaking with each other, like for us, that might be through our Spotify wrapped graphics, right? And, a lot of brands, right, create their own wraps, right, to engage organically with that conversation. And authenticity is more than a buzzword, it's a currency, right? And participating in the social currency of Gen Z can be difficult, right? Knowing what is cool and what is relevant. But Gen Z values it a lot, right? I mean, you can cut through the noise of this oversaturated media landscape and actually say something true and honest and relevant. And according to YPulse data shown in this edition of Amplify, 82% of Gen Z in North America and Western Europe say it's important that brands are authentic and true to themselves. But at the same time, we also are very well aware that Gen Z is often skeptical and critical to what extent that brands can be true to themselves, right? And that juxtaposition absolutely affects purchase decisions. Authenticity is a top 5 purchase driver for the entire generation. How can brands demonstrate authenticity when speaking to Gen Z without losing their brand essence?
So the stats that you just quoted are from YPulse's brand tracker. We look at thousands of brands across the two regions that we're currently in, and we measure young consumers' affinity for them across 20 very youth-centric metrics, like what brand is cool, like what brand is true to themselves, which is actually how we measure authenticity, because authenticity has been a huge buzzword for marketers for a long time. But when you ask young people what brand is authentic, that really needs some definition. And it's what brands are true to themselves. Actually, Merriam-Webster said that authentic was the word of the year for 2023 because searches for that word, that term, continue to increase for them. And I think in a world where, what's real and what's not real, harder and harder to discern, authenticity is more important to this generation, even if you are a marketer who's been hearing authentic for a long time. And YPulse's brand tracker research, we've actually done even deeper research on research to find out exactly what these metrics mean to young consumers, what authenticity means, and what brands can do to show that they are authentic. What can a brand do to show they are true to themselves? Gen Z's top answer to that question is a brand that has a true personality and isn't afraid to show it. So knowing that brand voice, knowing that brand persona, and really showing it on social platforms, in your marketing, so vital. Not having a really cold brand presence. You don't want to feel like a brand. You want to feel like a person to Gen Z. And 88% of 13 to 17-year-olds, 77% of 18 to 24-year-olds agree that they like when brands have personalities. So while I think older generations felt like brands on social media acting like people was really not what they were looking for, it's what Gen Z expects and what they want. And that's one of the biggest ways that brands can show that authenticity, that they are true to themselves. Of course, being true to your voice means you have to know what it is. The second top answer for them, really closely behind, is a brand that's honest and transparent about their practices. So honesty is so important to this generation. So those two things together, showing your personality and being honest about what you're working on, what your downfalls are right now, what you're working towards, and being imperfect, because that's another big part of Gen Z's ethos. I think those things all need to come together to really convey that authenticity. We have a lot of content around this because it can be so difficult for brands to really discern.
For sure. Rex, you want to chime in on anything there?
Yeah, I mean, I think really when it comes down to it, it's going to continue to come back to finding your brand voice, and that's really kind of where we keep coming back to. And I think it's important to do so, and it's important to remember that Gen Z also is a very unique group in the sense that they want to be able to take your brand voice and make it their own. This is, this leads into things like sonic memes and viral sounds. It sounds a little counterintuitive in the sense of you're handing over your branded product to someone else, but they are the ones, Gen Z is the ones who are making it big. They're the ones making it their own and unique. A recent poll showed that 56% of Gen Z identified as creative. That's a really cool thing. And I think because of that, if you can hand over the correct tools, they can be creative with them. And that includes sound, and that includes sonic, and that includes an authentic voice that will always relate back to your brand if it is truly authentic, even if it's altered slightly and it's flexible enough to be used by Gen Z in their creative ways.
And speaking of those creative ways, I think one thing that I think a lot about and speak a lot about, right, in our thought leadership as Chief Consulting is that so much of Gen Z culture is underwritten by meme culture, right? This idea that everything that Gen Z thinks is funny is usually replicable humor that takes a spin or a take on something that shows how in on the joke that you are, right? And we all speak these sort of languages within our microcosms of the internet, right? Whether it's alt talk or frog talk or whatever it might be, where we sort of developed unique formats of humor, right, and unique jokes, right, that really showcase that we are part of these communities and allow us to show our funny, smart take on whatever might be happening in the world around us. And that can be hard for brands to participate in, right? Because they're not necessarily organic or native to those communities. When we talk about authenticity, that's a real challenge, right? Because what does it look like to be authentic to a community you are not a part of, right? And I think that's like what we talk a lot to our brands about, is that sometimes the answer is you can't, right? You have to talk to and not talk amongst. And sometimes the goal is to become a part of that community, depending on what that community looks like. But I think one such community is TikTok, right? Broadly, right? It's no secret that TikTok is a viral marketing machine that a lot of brands are hesitant to get into. And originally, a lot of them were more like, here, let's create ads and talk to the space. And now increasingly, folks are trying to get inside of it. Let's become part of the community. Let's be in the comments, right? Let's get inside of it, right? And especially that's true in the music industry, where now TikTok has the power to turn songs into mega hits and decides a lot of the charts and really create sounds being cultural moments. So many Gen Zers, the way that we text, the way that we communicate with each other is through the audios that are stuck in our head all day long. And in AMP's latest Amplify magazine, The Sound of Gen Z, the team dives into what sonic memes really mean, right? Because so much of meme culture, which a meme can be anything from a text format humor to a person, to a song, to a sonic identity. What can brands do to become meme makers instead of meme followers while still staying on brand, navigating all of the above that I sort of just walked through?
I'll say first, it is okay to follow memes if you are a brand. If you're not comfortable trying to create your own and it's, you're afraid of being a tryhard, that's okay to kind of start out with following the meme and following the viral content. 69% of young consumers tell YPulse that they like when brands make memes based off of pop culture, and their pop culture is memes. So it all has to kind of pile onto each other. Speed is so important here. One way to follow viral culture but still feel like you are relevant is to do so really quickly, which means giving your social media team a lot of power and a lot of freedom. We've done research on young consumers, Gen Z's pop culture, how they're redefining it, what cultural moments matter to them. And in that research, we looked at how quickly brands need to act in order to be relevant when it comes to viral content. And 34% of Gen Z say that brands need to participate in a viral moment within 1 to 2 days. Then it starts to feel old. 33% say within the week. So the majority are telling you have a very short time frame in which to jump into a meme. So that's really important. And Sonic is not just about the audio meaning, but also about how quickly you move. And then when you're creating your own memes, I think understanding that culture really in and out, and the subcultures that live within a place like TikTok. YPulse has a subculture series where we really explore all of the individual, very niche kind of communities that live within TikTok. And I think brands need to understand all of the different activities that are happening there in order to create memes that really speak to them.
Yeah, and I think going off your comment around speed too, I think that's huge. We actually, in the Amplify magazine, we found how many more tracks Gen Z's favorite brands are using than compared to our best audio brands list, which we released over about 6 months ago. And it's about 100 more tracks per year. And one of the reasons we believe that's the case is because of this high demand of speed, get things out. We need constant content from brands, and that's great. And, I definitely sympathize with how difficult that must be to get that much content out. But to abandon your brand voice while doing so is part of the problem. Is we saw that many Gen Z were not able to necessarily connect audio to the brand. That was from a different report. But we're starting to see some solutions in things like Amp's new Sonic Hub tool that just came out, being able to implement your sonic identity so much faster than ever into stock music and other types of music that would be easier to get out than a bespoke track for a larger campaign. And I think that's what's going to start hopefully creating ease with that, while ease and speed without fully abandoning your voice. But I would love to continue on the Sonic meme track for a second, because I think we did a lot of research within this Amplify on Sonic memes, and there's so much unbelievable data. I get really excited about it. I think it is some of the coolest stuff that we saw, and definitely extremely unique to this generation. One of the questions we asked is we compared meme sounds from brands to non-meme sounds also from brands. So we compared, for instance, Microsoft XP startup sound to Apple startup sound. So again, we're not comparing a big brand to a brand that's small. We're comparing apples to apples here. So except for the fact that Microsoft went viral, we found that Gen Z was able to recognize the Microsoft startup sound. Well, not just them. We actually did a plethora of different brands that had viral memes, but we found that the meme startup sound was recognized 81% of the time by Gen Z compared to 41% of non-Gen Z non-viral sounds by Gen Z. That's a huge swing. I mean, we're talking most people to less than half. But, one of the things that took me aback, and I'm going to start by saying there's a great research paper from 2007 on this from Hinata, who found, how many times have you both been listening to music and you're like, oh man, I know every word of this song, but I cannot name the song. Like, I mean, it happens to me daily,
course.
right?
Yes.
I mean, and it's pretty remarkable though when you can name the song, because it shows such a connection to the name of the artist, to the name of the album, whatever it may be. That connection is driven a lot harder home than just the lyrics, even though you're going to know the song. And so we actually found that with an open answered question, so we didn't prime anyone with anything, no lists, nothing, 54% of that 81% who recognized, well, actually not of the 81% of the total population, but 54% of them correctly identified the brand with a free all answer from just hearing the sound, free answer. 25%, and that was for the viral meme sounds, while only 25% for the non-viral meme sounds. That to me was the biggest finding right there. There is the connection. If your brand goes viral with a sonic meme, you are going to get in the minds of Gen Z, not just based on the sound, and people aren't just going to recognize it, but they're going to know that that's your brand sound. And that is really, really crucial. And I think that just moving forward, that is really the big focus of getting to that point.
That's so cool. I feel like one of the lessons then for brands is kind of figuring out, and it sounds a little bit esoteric, but I think it is real. What sounds do people already associate with your brand, as opposed to jumping onto something that's already happening, which again, free license, that's okay. That's great. But if you want to be a meme maker, what sounds do you already have? And it makes me think of, back in the day, KFC doing the ASMR with the chicken frying and, jumping into that, but really making it their own. Or, is there a sound that they already associate with your product that you can really capitalize on? That's so interesting.
Absolutely.
And on that point, right, I think that is, really good tactical advice, right? To think about like what audio do you already have associated with your brand? Because I think a lot of the challenge that a lot of brands are facing is, okay, we want to jump on these viral audio trends, but a lot of them run into copyright issues, right? Or licensed music, right? Especially in these short form content platforms. And so I think that's one really good tactical advice, MaryLeigh, to think about, what sounds you already have within your ecosystem that you can then, capsule and, create content around. But how else can brands hop on trends without owned music and expect effective results?
So, MaryLeigh,
go for it.
You got it. Okay. I think that when it comes to owned versus licensed music, we're constantly seeing that licensed music does not hold up. I'll start with the portion of actually a follow-up study that we did from the one I just spoke about, where we found that Gen Z was most likely, we asked Gen Z what kinds of videos with what types of audio they were most likely to interact with, which means comment, like, subscribe, click on the link, whatever it may be. Viral sounds was number one. So meme sounds was number one. Number 2 was custom music. And it was actually double than licensed music. So even if you're going to, getting to that viral stage is really difficult. That is not something that just happened, or it kind of is something that just happens. Gen Z will take your flexible sonic asset, if you have it, which is step 1, and make it their own. If that doesn't go viral, though, you haven't missed out on that opportunity, because you're still going to get a larger interaction fan base than if you use licensed tracks. And following that up is we're also seeing that brands have not been able to hold any brand equity with a licensed track as well. So I'm going to play a quick game with you guys, if that's okay. I've been playing this with actually so many people, and there's only been 2 answers that I've gotten. So I'd love to hear if there's a third answer that I haven't heard yet. That would be really fun. When I say the song, and I'll tell you it's a song, Start Me Up, first thing that comes to mind.
I can hear the song, and I can kind of see the band playing it. Very signature dance move across the stage. And that's pretty much it.
And nothing really conjures too much for me, but I feel like the more you tell me, the more I'll get.
There we go. So that totally makes sense. I've had a lot of, I can hear the song in my head. I have no idea what it's related to. I will say it's a Rolling Stones song. So I have gotten the response of, the Rolling Stones, of course, 1981, I think it was. Like it was, I got a lot of that. And then I've also, Ziad, I got a lot of that as well. I don't really know, but maybe if you tell me more. The only thing I will, one of the things that I have not gotten yet is I have not heard, Microsoft. Because why would you say Microsoft after me telling you that you're hearing this song?
No.
It makes no sense, right? Granted, Microsoft paid $3 million in 1995 to use that song for their commercial. That's a lot of money. Yet, we just studied the Microsoft startup sound, and 84% of Gen Z can correctly identify that sound relates back to Microsoft. So when you're talking about investing in licensed music versus identities, it's kind of like what you were saying, MaryLeigh, like you can go back to old sounds. They always will hold equity if they're constantly related back to your brand. And a licensed track does not have that significance because it has its own cultural capital. The Rolling Stones have their own cultural capital. So by borrowing that, you're momentarily borrowing it, but you're not going to borrow it for the long term. It's more expensive. It's also more risky, as you never know how bands' perceptions are going to change over time. And then on top of that, you also don't have ownership. I just saw the same Start Me Up song in an Applebee's commercial last year. No one said Applebee's either to the game, by the way. I was kind of
that's shocking.
I know, right? I was a little bummed out about that one. I thought maybe in the more prevalent, but
Well, I think one of the issues is, right, that Gen Z is not watching commercials. So that's not really going to resonate with them. Like if you're going to spend big money on licensed music, probably as a brand, you're going to put it in an ad that's going to run on cable or a streaming platform. But Gen Z is really not going to be seeing that. When we ask Gen Z, where's the last place that you saw an ad that made you want to buy something? The answer for 13 to 17-year-olds and 18 to 24-year-olds, the top answer is TikTok. So they're not sitting through your ads. So that licensed music, if you are investing in it for a big spot, you're probably spending your money where you shouldn't be. If this is your audience, if this is your target audience. I think we should also say that, brands have been creating their own songs for TikTok. Elf is a great example, Eyes, Lips, Face. And they did really well with that. They were one of the first brands that really kind of experimented with sound on TikTok in an original way. But lots of brands have now jumped into that. And I think creating your own content, creating your own sounds is probably the better way to do it when Gen Z is spending so much time on a platform where it's all about creativity. It's all about your own unique stamp. I also think we should say that the majority of Gen Z are nano creators. And by that, I mean they are creating content for an audience beyond their family and friends on social media. And YPulse has done a lot of research on new content creators and this generation of content creators. So they're also organically creating their own sounds, music or sonic memes. And brands should really be tapping into those more, I would say, than dropping the millions of dollars on that licensed music or rolling the dice and being like, we're going to use the song anyway, even if we don't have the permission. Working with nano creators, putting the spotlight on them is really one of the keys to, I would say, your audio strategy or your social media strategy and creator strategy. It does not have to be a huge creator to go viral, because TikTok has democratized that algorithm. And I think brands are missing the mark if they're not looking at the organic content that's already being created around their brand.
So speaking of millions of dollars, at the end of the day, right, when people are investing in brand, they want to know that there are results, right? So I guess the question before we sort of shift into Q&A with folks who maybe commented some questions, if you have some questions, please do comment them so we can answer them. The last question is, do we think that through the use of owned music by brands and short-form video platforms, can that increase sales and actually affect bottom lines? Can the use of proper music and a proper use of music and sonic strategy shift Gen Z's perception of a brand? And is it worth that investment?
Go for it, Rex.
Okay, I was just gonna say, I think it absolutely is. I mean, we're seeing just as
I think we have the same answer.
I was gonna say, I think we're gonna continue to circle on this one a little bit, but I think just the quantity of Gen Z who's willing to click on TikTok videos, buy via TikTok now with the TikTok platform. One of the great stats that I saw recently was that about half of Gen Z starts their search for products on TikTok or a short form video, like not Google anymore. So we're talking about sound driven products, and based on our results, they show that people are more willing to be clicking on, liking, subscribing, doing whatever with brands that use custom music and sonic memes specifically that are branded. We're going to start seeing that even more and more. It's actually growing, which is the crazier part, because of how Gen Z is using these platforms.
Yeah, I would say absolutely. We know brands want to see the ROI, right? They want to see it. It's more difficult on social media to get those metrics, although much easier now than it was even a few years ago. There's, more measures in place, but we've seen so many examples over the years now of brands going viral on TikTok and seeing absolute sellout. I think, there are several makeup brands that we could point to, e.l.f. being one of them, but definitely Maybelline, where, there's a organic viral content around their brand, around a product, and they're seeing complete sellouts in stores. Lush is another great example. So it might not be the ROI that brands are used to seeing, or the metrics that they're used to seeing, but it's there. And I think as we go on and more of these on-platform shopping tools are built, TikTok Shops is, just launched. So I think brands are just figuring out what to do with that. And social shopping has really evolved so much in the last few years. It continues to do so. But I think we'll see more and more measures where it's really clear that ROI exists. For a long time, it's just kind of been like, trust us, it works. But really, I think we're starting to see more measures are going to be in place where you're seeing that direct ROI, and it's just undeniable.
Amazing. Well, I think now we can maybe transition to some of the audience questions that we've received. And I think speaking of some brand, it just came up on the screen. Amazing. Ocean, is that how we pronounce her name? Asks, what are some of the old school brands that have managed to really create a recognizable audio brand voice with Gen Z today?
I was going to say, one of the ones that comes to mind was actually a rebranding, and they did it. It's a little different than a full sonic identity, but they've done a really good job with this, which is Burger King with their Have It Your Way commercials that have been going on. Because
nonstop.
It's nonstop.
If you have cable, it is nonstop. You cannot escape. You cannot run.
Nope. And they've done a good, and speaking of the flexibility though, right? I mean, that's that's where and I'm totally with you. Their consistency is
It's
on
wild.
point. Cannot argue with it. But I will say, I think the reason that I say they've done a really great job with it is because they created something that was flexible enough for Gen Z to take and make their own. They took it from their 1974 original commercial, so it held brand equity over a generation, 2 generations potentially. So that's important. But then also one of the things that was so amazing about it was their flexibility, where they had, yes, they did a consistent use, but they had a recognizable melody. They had very specific timbral decisions, and all of that led to them being able to then hand it over to Gen Z. Gen Z took the lyrics and made it their own. I've heard 2 very funny ones recently. One was on someone made a spoof using like trying to promote Victor Wembanyama, the #1 overall pick for the San Antonio Spurs NBA team last summer, to try to get him to, like, I don't know, just like promote him. And I heard another one on like taxis. Yet the craziest point of all of this, and this goes back to the question, is that I was actually, funny enough, 2 months ago at a restaurant watching a game, and I live near a university, and a bunch of university students were sitting at a table, and the song came on, and the whole group stood up and started singing the song. Pretty wild. But again, it connects all back to Burger King. Their brand voice was heard. It went viral, creating different versions of it. And I think, to me, that kind of taking that old school sound, making it new, readjusting it to the current landscape, was a really solid move.
Yeah. I mean, I think there are lots of examples. One thing that we always say at YPulse is, you don't have to be a new brand to reach Gen Z. They're very open to reinvention, to rebranding, and to brands that evolve and try to keep up with them and make changes to do that. But I think, one of the examples that comes straight to mind is actually not a new example, but I think a really great use of TikTok content, and it was Applebee's. So we haven't had an example here of one Applebee's, maybe spending money where they shouldn't. And then there was the example of that damn Applebee's song that went viral on TikTok, that, there were hundreds, millions of videos about TikTok. Applebee's saw that content and jumped into it on the app, but also put it into their ads on streaming platforms, on cable, actually showed the content of creators that were putting this out on TikTok. And I think that was really smart, harnessing the creativity that Gen Z is already putting out there. As I said, is one of the key things that brands should be doing, highlighting nano creators. And they did it in such a massive way. And really, again, looked at the organic content that was being created or spreading about their brand, and took that and ran with it. So I think that's one great example. I think, it's somewhat audio, somewhat video, but I think the recent Stanley Cup viral content is a great example, layering on to the woman who said that her Stanley Cup survived the car fire that destroyed her car. Iconic. And showing that there was ice in it, and then the brand, stepping in and creating their own content around that, I think is another great one. Stanley Cup might be really viral right now. Thank you, women.
Sure.
But they're also 100-plus-year-old brand.
Yeah,
talk about reinventing yourself by finding a new audience. So I think that's thank you, women everywhere. And I think that's another great example. There are so many. I think you don't have to be a new brand. You just need to find out where you fit in the new landscape.
Amazing. Let's see what our next question from the audience is. Joseph asks, do you think brands are shifting more towards audio due to the realization that Gen Z's attention span is shorter than older generations?
Absolutely. And Gen Z knows it. YPulse released a report just a few months ago called Attention Economy, where we really broke down what types of content are actually holding Gen Z's attention, but also how much multitasking are they actually doing? And, to say their attention is fragmented is an understatement. You really can't can't really put into words just how much they're moving from one thing to another, from second to second, minute to minute. Most of the time when they're doing something else, they're also on social media. So if you do get them to tune into your live event, they're probably also on their feeds. So yes, absolutely. Their attention span is short. They know it. And one of the constants that's happening, though, is sound, listening to music all day or spending 4+ hours on their feeds while they're doing other things. So that shift to audio has to happen, really.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And just to add on to that, I think as well, with how quickly, even the actual, if we're going to think about TikTok as the kind of driver of this shorter attention span, or just short form video content as that, the actual platform itself is easy to scroll through, right? You can just constantly be going like this. So one of the great ways of avoiding, just having your logo at the end of a video is by starting out with a Sonic logo in the beginning, or having a track that has your Sonic identity playing through the video. So if they decide they don't want to get to the end of the video, which I don't think many do, most people just keep scrolling, even if it's 4 seconds, as long as there's something recognizable there in the audio format, because now we're on audio on platforms, then you don't need necessarily to target a specific moment. You just need it from the get-go to always be branding with your audio. And so the short attention span can be kind of mitigated by the fact that you're constantly branding from the moment the video starts to the end.
Amazing. I certainly agree. Yeah. I mean, I think that like TikTok inherently is where people go to reach Gen Z often. And that's an audio first in many ways platform, because of how it's really the audios that synthesize the meme format and how we're remembering them, as opposed to maybe always the visuals. Cool. Chris asks, outside of the top 5 Gen Z brands in the report, are there any other brands you think are doing things other than Stanley Cup that we should pay attention to in regards to marketing to the younger generation through sound? I mean, for me personally, just to chime in, I think Mastercard has really been at the forefront of Sonic branding insofar as like Raja, and I think his thought leadership in thinking about branding through all 5 senses, and how in the world that we're living in, marketing and advertising isn't static, right? It's holistic, right? It has to live where we live. And I think the world that we live in is one that is sensory. And so thinking about your brand through a sensory experience and through not just sound, but smell, right? Touch, right? And thinking about how your brand lives beyond just the way that we see it, but the way that we feel it. I think Mastercard has been really a thought leader in thinking through that challenge and being a trailblazer in that space. But there's, I think, a ton of brands that are killing it on TikTok that obviously like Duolingo or Ryanair, right, who I think are using, the audios, and whether they're reinventing audios or recording their own or whatever it might be. And of course, Elf, which is a client of ours, continues to be, such an iconic brand in the space for sure. But Rex and MaryLeigh, I don't know if you guys have other thoughts there.
Yeah, I think, we talked a tiny bit about Gen Z and mental health and what a focus that is for the generation. They're far more open about mental wellness than previous generations were. Thank you. Thank God. And I think that there are brands that are really connecting audio and mental wellness and mindfulness for the younger generation, and millennials as well, but really geared toward the younger generation in really smart ways. I think Calm and Headspace are 2 great examples of, mindfulness or meditation apps that have created content for Gen Z or Gen Alpha. And it's really focused on sound and how sound can calm and how sound can be connected to mental wellness. I think Disney is also a great example. They don't need a plug, but they have content on Disney Plus called Zenimation, and it's their movies clipped together but stripped of the bombastic songs and really brought down to an ASMR mindfulness kind of soundtrack of just what water sounds like, or rain, or any of these things, and that's definitely experimental, and certainly not something that the brand is putting as their centerpiece of their content, but they're playing around with sound, I think, in a really interesting way to reach this generation in their efforts to be mindful and to be calm. And for millennial parents, their efforts to calm those kids down and help them be mindful and make that a focus as well. So I think those are just a few brands that have done a really interesting job.
For sure. I think we have time for maybe one more question. Daryl asks, TikTok and YouTube are definitely drivers, but how effective is Snapchat for brands wanting to connect with Gen Z?
I know I was just talking, but I have to say, brands should not be ignoring Snapchat, which I think, I mentioned TikTok has become such a big focus and there's so much buzz and it's understandable. And we're part of the problem. We tell brands like you need to be on there, but absolutely Gen Z is still using Snapchat so much to connect with friends. So I think that brands should be paying attention to that app if Gen Z is their focus. And it was one of the lessons we had in our social media playbooks for sure, that it's still a huge part of their social connections, and they're spending a lot of time on there.
And Rex, anything you want to add?
No, I think that's kind of wraps that up for sure. Yeah. We have not done too much research on Snapchat, but excited to hopefully dive into it soon. That sounds exciting.
Amazing. So we were just talking about some brands that are killing it, but I think our friends at AMP have a top 5 Gen Z brands little video to play before we close out more formally.
Break free with Capri.
PlayStation.
All iconic brands. Love to see it.
So much nostalgia.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. But I think we're coming up at time now. And so I want to thank Rex and MaryLeigh for being such phenomenal thought leaders and experts in offering your counsel and advice and perspective on this new frontier of sonic branding. I think it's such an interesting time for media and content and branding. And I encourage folks to download the Amplify, the Sound of Gen Z report on AMP's website. And if there are other things, Rex and MaryLeigh, that you think folks will be checking out, we can definitely drop them in the comments and keep the conversation going. But Rex, MaryLeigh, I don't know if you have any closing words that you want to say before we close out.
Absolutely. Well, if you have an ongoing need for Gen Z information, definitely sign up for YPulse's daily newsletter. We also produce a weekly roundup. So if daily is too much for you, we get it. We are really providing the research-based facts and insights about Gen Z on a daily basis. So sharing our own research as well. Definitely go ahead and do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you guys both so much. This has been awesome. Really excited. In about a month and a half or so, I think mid-February, we'll be releasing our next Amplify with Gen Z, or not Gen Z, Amplify alcohol. Definitely not Gen Z alcohol, Amplify alcohol, which will be analyzing alcohol brands from different sectors in the alcohol industry. Really exciting research was done in there. So really excited for that. So stay tuned for that. And as always, our best audio brands, which will come out later in the year. Just definitely reach out if there's any sonic branding needs. And this was awesome. Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. And thank you to AMP for having me. Thrilled to be here. Always thrilled to talk about all things Gen Z. That's who I am and what I do. And very grateful to be in community with you all. And thank you to everyone who's been watching. I hope you have a wonderful weekend ahead.
Yeah. Thank you.
Bye, friends.
Take care.